On a freezing autumn morning in 1820, in the low-lying bogs of
Cold as
Yorkshire,
God's
a
grave,
woman walks
but the
slowly
peat must
into
be cut.
stagnant, pitch-black water. She doesn't wear rubber boots or protective gear. Her skirts are pinned up past her knees, exposing bare, pale legs to the frigid water. She stands entirely still. Minutes pass in total silence. Then she feels it. A soft, cold ripple against her skin, followed by a sharp, subtle sting on her calf, then another on her ankle. Within 20 minutes, dozens of dark, writhing creatures are clinging to her skin, slicing into her flesh with teeth arranged like tiny circular saws, and pumping naturally occurring anesthetics and blood thinners into her veins. She does not pull them off immediately. She waits until they are fully engorged, swelling to 5 times their original size, heavy with her own blood. Only when they drop off or loosen their grip does she collect them, placing them into a small linen sack bound around her waist. She will repeat this process for 8 hours today.
There now.
By nightfall,
Good
she will have
bloodletting
lost
waits for
nearly
no
a
man.
pint of blood. Her legs will be covered in small, Y-shaped wounds that will not stop bleeding for hours, even long after she steps out of the marsh. She is not a victim of a crime. She is not undergoing a ritual punishment. She is a leech collector, an essential worker in one of the most profitable, bizarre, and terrifying booms in the history of medicine. In the early 19th century, the global medical establishment ran on a single, ravenous demand: millions of live worms harvested directly from murky wetlands. Empires spent fortunes securing them. Doctors prescribed them by the dozen for everything from headaches to cholera. Yet the entire multi-million-dollar global trade rested on the shoulders of impoverished women who use their own bodies as live fishing lures. To understand how human
Just
legs
one more
became
stretch.
the primary infrastructure of world healthcare, we have to uncover a medical delusion that lasted 2,000 years, and the forgotten class of workers who paid for it in blood. For centuries, European medicine was trapped inside an idea developed in ancient Greece. The physician Galen had formalized the theory of humorism, the belief that the human body was governed by 4 primary fluids, or humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Illness, according to this theory, was never caused by microscopic pathogens, genetic anomalies, or environmental toxins. Illness was simply an imbalance of the humors. And more often than not, doctors believed the body had far too much blood. For generations, bloodletting was performed using simple steel blades called lancets. A surgeon or barber would slice open a vein in the arm, catch the blood in a pewter bowl, and stop when the patient grew faint. It was violent, imprecise, and often left patients vulnerable to lethal infections. Then came the leech. Compared to a cold steel blade, the leech appeared to be a gift of nature. The species Hirudo medicinalis possessed 3 jaws, each lined with roughly 100 micro-teeth. When it bit, it delivered a precise, painless puncture. More importantly, its saliva contained a complex chemical cocktail, a local anesthetic to dull the pain, a vasodilator to expand blood vessels, and a potent anticoagulant that prevented blood from clotting. A leech did not just take blood while it was attached. The chemical cocktail it injected ensured the wound would continue to seep blood for hours after the creature dropped off. To physicians, it was the ultimate biological surgical tool: controlled, quiet, and targeted. By the late 18th century, bloodletting with leeches had shifted from an occasional treatment to an absolute obsession. The madness reached its peak in Paris during the 1820s, driven largely by a charismatic physician named François-Joseph Victor Broussais. Broussais served as a surgeon in Napoleon's armies and came away with a radical theory. Every single disease originated from inflammation in the gastrointestinal tract. His universal cure: applied dozens of leeches directly to the patient's stomach. Broussais was not a fringe practitioner. He was the most influential medical authority in Europe. Under his direction, hospitals transformed into leech wards. A patient admitted with typhus might have 30 leeches applied to their abdomen simultaneously. Someone with a sore throat had them placed on their neck. Women suffering from hysteria had leeches attached to their temples. The numbers were staggering. In 1823, France imported around 1 million leeches. By 1833, just 10 years later, France alone was consuming over 57 million leeches a year. Great Britain was importing millions more from the continent. Hospitals in London were spending up to 10% of their total operating budgets exclusively on leech supplies. The world was burning through tens of millions of aquatic parasites every single month. But leeches do not grow in factories, and they cannot be harvested with nets. Demand had outpaced supply, creating an economic crisis that could only be solved by human flesh. To understand why women were forced to use their legs as bait, you have to understand the hunting behavior of Hirudo medicinalis. Leeches are ambush predators that live in stagnant, muddy waters. They do not swim around hunting continuously. They rest in the silt, conserving energy until they detect two specific triggers: movement in the water and the warmth of a mammal's body heat. Early gatherers attempted to harvest them using nets, wooden sticks, or dead animal carcasses, but these methods failed completely on a commercial scale. Nets dragged through marsh bottoms crushed the fragile creatures, making them useless for medical sales. Dead meat, like a piece of liver on a string, lacked heat and motion. Leeches would largely ignore it. Some merchants tried driving old, worn-out horses into the marshes to attract leeches. It worked, but it was economically disastrous. The horses quickly succumbed to massive blood loss, developed severe infections in the murky water, or drowned when they collapsed from weakness. A horse was an expensive asset to lose for a basket of worms. Human beings, however, were cheap. In rural Britain, France, Germany, and Russia, severe poverty squeezed rural communities. Agriculture was seasonal, and industrialization was displacing traditional cottage industries. For poor women, elderly workers, and children who had no land and no access to factory work, leech finding became one of the few ways to secure daily bread. The process was brutally simple. A leech collector walked out into the bogs at dawn. When water temperatures were cool and leeches were hungry, she would wade through the water, splashing gently with her feet to mimic a swimming animal. The vibrations woke the leeches from the mud. Her body heat drew them straight to her skin. Once the leeches attached, she had to exercise immense patience. If she pulled a leech off too quickly while its teeth were locked into her skin, its jaws could snap off inside the wound, causing severe infection and rendering the leech injured. And an injured leech could not be sold to an apothecary. She had to let them bite, feed, and swell. Only when the leech was fat, heavy, and ready to detach, could she gently scrape it off with her fingers or a small pinch of salt, dropping it into an earthen jar filled with marsh water. A skilled collector could gather anywhere from 50 to 100 leeches in a single day. But the economic system was stacked against her. Apothecaries and middleman brokers bought leeches in bulk by the hundred, paying the collectors pittance prices, often just a few, pennies for a day's work, while reselling those same leeches to urban hospitals at markup rates exceeding 1,000%. Earn enough money to survive. Collectors had to go back into the bogs day after day, week after week, and their bodies paid the price. The physical toll on leech collectors went far beyond the immediate discomfort of a bite. The primary medical hazard was chronic, severe anemia. Because leech saliva contains hirudin, a compound that prevents blood clotting for hours, a collector did not just lose the blood consumed by the leech itself. Each bite wound continued to ooze steadily long after she left the water. A collector with 30 or 40 fresh bites on her legs could lose several ounces of blood every evening. Contemporary medical journals from the 1830s described leech-gathering women as pale, emaciated, and unnaturally frail. Many suffered from chronic fatigue, dizziness, and fainting spells. In the cold winters, when water temperatures plummeted, collectors wading through freezing bogs were prone to severe hypothermia, frostbite, and gangrene. Then there was the threat of infection. The marshes were not clean water systems. They were stagnant ecosystems filled with decaying vegetation, animal waste, and wild bacteria. The Y-shaped wounds left by leeches were open pathways directly into the bloodstream. Collectors frequently developed deep, ulcerating leg sores that refused to heal. Bacterial infections like erysipelas, a severe skin infection, and sepsis were common. A simple scratch from a reed combined with a dozen leech bites could easily cost a woman her leg or her life. Yet social perception offered them no sympathy. Upper class, Victorian society looked upon leech collectors with a mixture of disgust and mild amusement. They were viewed as low, dirty figures wandering the margins of civilization. William Wordsworth famously wrote a poem in 1802 titled Resolution and Independence. Inspired by an old leech gatherer he met on the English moors, Wordsworth captured the bleak reality of the trade, writing of a man who traveled from pond to pond. Gathering leeches, far and wide he went. Having one shelter on the cold green earth, he with his feet stirred up the eddying mud, where they together lay in silent couples assembly, and on the stalk of an authentic reed he fixed his eye and held his breath. Wordsworth noted that even then, the old man complained that leeches were getting harder to find. The wild populations were mysteriously vanishing. What the poets did not realize was that humanity's appetite for blood had triggered an unprecedented ecological catastrophe. By the 1830s, the wild leech populations of Western Europe were collapsing. Centuries of harvesting had stripped the wetlands of France, England, and Germany. At the same time, the Industrial Revolution was driving massive drainage projects. Bogs were being filled in, marshes turned into farmland, and natural habitats destroyed. The result was a panicked global shortage. Leeches became a high-value commodity, leading to an international trade war. Prices skyrocketed. In 1800, 1,000 leeches cost a few shillings. By 1835, that same batch could fetch up to 300 French francs, a fortune at the time. Nations began establishing strict trade restrictions to protect their remaining leech reserves. France banned the export of wild leeches under heavy criminal penalties, attempting to hoard its remaining supply for domestic hospitals. The Russian Empire placed strict seasonal quotas on leech harvesting and introduced heavy export taxes on shipments leaving the country. Portugal and Spain deployed armed patrols along their marshlands to prevent leech poachers from smuggling specimens across borders. In response, organized leech smuggling rings emerged. Contraband leeches were packed into wet turf or moist leather bags and smuggled across European borders inside false-bottomed carriages, hidden underneath loads of hay or slipped onto cargo ships bound for London and New York. Because wild supplies were failing, entrepreneurs began constructing artificial leech farms, known in France as leecheries. These farms consisted of vast networks of shallow ponds stocked with thousands of leeches. But feeding millions of farm-raised leeches presented a new challenge. The farm owners couldn't rely on human collectors alone. The scale was too vast. Instead, they bought old, worn-out horses from city streets, drove them into the artificial ponds, and held them there while thousands of leeches attacked them at once. When the horses died of blood loss, their carcasses were dragged out, replaced by the next doomed animal. It was an industry running on desperation, cruelty, and vast sums of capital. Yet just as the leech industry hit its absolute financial peak, the entire foundation of Western medical thought began to crumble. By the 1850s, a quiet revolution was taking place inside European laboratories. A new generation of scientists, men like Louis Pasteur in France and Robert Koch in Germany, began looking through microscopes. They didn't see imbalances of black bile or excess blood. They saw bacteria, single-celled organisms, and cellular pathology. Germ theory was born. Virtually overnight, the foundation of medical humorism collapsed. Physicians realized that draining a sick patient's blood did not remove the cause of their disease. It simply weakened the patient's immune system, making it far harder for their body to fight off the actual pathogen. Statistical studies began to emerge from major European hospitals. Doctors who compared cholera and pneumonia patients treated with leeches against those left untreated discovered a horrifying truth. Patients who were leeched died at significantly higher rates than those who received no treatment at all. The medical establishment had spent decades accelerating the deaths of hundreds of thousands of people, fueled by millions of parasites harvested by impoverished women. As germ theory took hold, Leechmania vanished almost as quickly as it had begun. By the late 19th century, demand plummeted. Hospitals dropped leeches from their procurement lists. Apothecaries removed the ornate ceramic leech jars that had sat on their counters for generations. The leech farms fell into disrepair. The smuggling networks dissolved, and the leech collectors, the women who had spent decades bleeding in freezing marshes, simply disappeared back into the margins of history, their body-altering labor forgotten by a modernizing world. It seemed that the story of the leech was over, written off as a dark, embarrassing chapter of medical ignorance. Except for one detail, history was not quite finished with Hirudo medicinalis. In the late 20th century, modern surgery achieved miraculous breakthroughs. Surgeons learned how to reattach severed fingers, ears, toes, and large flaps of skin using delicate microsurgical techniques under high-powered microscopes. They could stitch microscopic arteries back together, restoring fresh, oxygenated blood flow to a reattached finger. But they ran into a severe, recurring technical failure. Arteries are thick, muscular vessels that carry blood into tissue under high pressure. They are relatively easy to locate and reattach. Veins, however, are extremely thin-walled, fragile vessels that carry blood away from tissue. In many traumatic injuries, the veins are completely shattered and cannot be restitched. This created a deadly physiological problem known as venous congestion. Blood would pump into the reattached finger through the repaired artery, but it had no way to exit. The blood pooled, clotted, and turned the tissue dark purple. Deprived of circulation, the reattached finger would starve of oxygen, turn necrotic, and die within days. Synthetic blood thinners like heparin couldn't solve the problem. If given globally, the patient would bleed out from their surgical wounds, but applied locally, synthetic drugs couldn't clear the microclots in delicate capillary networks. Surgeons were desperate. Then, a few researchers looked back at history. In the 1980s, medical teams began testing live medicinal leeches on failing surgical reattachments. The results were astonishing. When a leech attaches to a congested finger, it does two things that no modern chemical or surgical tool can replicate simultaneously. It gently drains excess, pooled blood from the clogged tissue, immediately relieving the dangerous pressure inside the vessel walls. It injects its saliva, containing hirudin, the most powerful natural anticoagulant known to science, along with anti-inflammatory compounds and natural vasodilators. Long after the leech fills up and falls off, its saliva continues to cause the tiny wound to bleed microdrops of blood for up to 10 to 24 hours. This continuous, controlled oozing gives the human body just enough time, usually 3 to 5 days, to grow entirely new native veins across the surgical seam, establishing permanent drainage. The leech does not just save the tissue. It acts as a temporary, living vein until the body can repair itself. In 2004, the United States Food and Drug Administration, FDA, officially cleared Hirudo medicinalis as a regulated medical device, the first living animal to receive such clearance in modern history. Today, high-tech bioproduction facilities breed sterile, laboratory-raised leeches under sterile conditions. They are shipped in cold containers to modern hospital ICUs around the globe, saving thousands of reattached limbs, facial reconstructions, and skin grafts every single year. The story of the leech collector is easy to dismiss as a bizarre relic of an ignorant past. But it reveals a fundamental truth about how human civilization moves forward. Science does not advance in a straight line. It stumbles through centuries of delusion, driven by theories that sound logical until proven disastrous. In the 19th century, elite physicians sat in grand university halls writing brilliant treatises on the balance of the humors. They took the credit for medical advancements, collected high fees, and achieved prestige. But the actual weight of their grand delusion was carried on the bleeding legs of poor, forgotten women standing knee-deep in freezing water. They were the uncredited engine of an entire era of medicine. They endured chronic anemia, systemic infection, social contempt, and physical exhaustion, all to harvest a creature that doctors misused for centuries, only for modern science to rediscover its true, remarkable purpose 150 years later. The next time you look at a medical breakthrough or a high-tech surgical miracle, remember that progress is rarely clean. It is built upon forgotten labor, ancient mistakes, and the anonymous workers who stood in the dark marshes of history, giving their own blood so the rest of the world could survive.